Okay, before we get started with the model, one of the first things we need to decide is our file structure, and having a plan for organizing your files and going through that process is going to be a big benefit as we go further in and the models and assemblies get more complicated. So recommend that if you have the Google Drive sync, OneDrive sync, Dropbox, any of those cloud storage that you're comfortable with, that you pick one and that becomes where you create a new folder for your projects. And so I'm going to name this for the 2019 semester. It is going to be 2019 spring, and these will be my Solidworks assignments, so just kind of keeping in the same makes sense to me as what I did last semester. The other thing that we can do then is on your quick access for Windows 10 is if I right click, I can pin that to quick access, and then even if all of these are collapsed, I'm going to be able to get to it relatively easily. So we'll fly that out of the way. And looking at the part, always going to say take 30 seconds, a minute, whatever it takes to look at this part and make some decisions. We haven't really gotten into the relations, so the first couple of parts we're going to draw just strictly as the model presents, but keep in mind that this is not how it has to be. If I recognize that this is going to be symmetrical and always centered on this top face, then I can make a design decision early in this process and say that this part, that hole, will always be at the center regardless of how big or small I make it. So I'm planning on changes. I'm planning on things happening. Reuse, repurpose, recycle, that we can instead of starting from scratch every time, if I can reuse this model, I'm going to take advantage of that. So let's see if we shrink that down just a little bit and I fly this out of the way. Again, this is the Kindle version of the 2016 Engineering Design and Graphics with SolidWorks. This should be the same, and I will do a quick verify with the other versions, but this should be the same as 2010, 2011, and 2014. So looking at our work area, I left the part open from the previous video. The first thing that we have to do is identify where we want to sketch. So initially we're going to pick the front plane for convenience, but as we get more into the visual, there may be times where I know that this part is going to go in the assembly in a certain orientation, and it would be convenient, it would be handy to draw it in the top plane, and then when I bring it into the assembly, it's already in that orientation, or when I take it into the drawing, it already has the orientation, so I don't have to manipulate it. If it's not in the orientation, it's not a big deal. We can rotate it, we can change the views, we can do what we need to do, but if we plan ahead a little bit, it's going to save us some time later on. Let's see, as far as the thicknesses, let's check out the instructions, sketch the shapes, and then use the specified thickness values. So we're going to go ahead and bring these out to a feature thickness. So initially we're going to just do a lot of Boss Basic extrudes, which that gets you into the mindset, but our focus for this first chapter really is the sketching, really is going to be the relations. And in the playlist and the YouTube playlist and on our Canvas learning management system, I put the relations file up early. All right, so there was last semester's intro and the relations, and now we're going into this semester's. And even if you haven't quite made the connections to those, refer back to that and to that relations video, and start to cement the horsepower, the workflow behind those relations. All right, so from the front plane, if I highlight and just hover over top, it's going to highlight in orange. If I select it like the front plane, it's going to show up in blue. And as we drag over each of those items, and then the origin shows up as a point. The origin is the intersection of those three planes, and that is defining our location, giving us a starting point in this 3D environment and in the universe. Alright, so at the top we have the part, we have its configuration, and then we have its display state. So I'm not really concerned about these. There will be a time where that will come in handy. I mentioned that as an ongoing process, we may turn things on or off as needed. So since I'm not using the sensors, next time I go into the options, I will probably turn the sensors off. Some of these option settings are going to be modal. They will stay with the system from session to session. And some of them will update depending on the template on the that we chose to open it with. So we'll try to identify those as we go. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is sketch, and to get to this point, let's backtrack just a second. To get to this point, File, New, or Control N, or come up to the icon and select New. That will take you into your template selection, and we went over to the tutorial and just picked the default part template. Alright, so the default part template doesn't really have, if you don't see the origin, then you're going to come up to the Hide Show Items and click on the View Origins. Alright, when we come back around and make our template, and at any point you want to jump over to the part template, it is in the list, it is in the playlist, and you can get started just kind of going through those basic settings. But I would recommend doing, I don't know, maybe the first 5 or 6 parts. So the first thing we need to do is pick our plane, and we'll stay with the front. We can come up to Sketch. Keep in mind that when you're going through each of these items, that the little arrow, you can do the pull down, and we have Sketch, 3D Sketch, and 3D Sketch on plane. We don't need the 3D Sketch or the 3D Sketch. In fact, we're going to avoid those for a little while. So in that case, we can just click on Sketch. That's going to put us into our sketch. So notice that the origin goes from blue to red. And if we didn't have an origin, now we do. The sketch will always have the red origin. We have the reference triad in the corner that's showing us X and Y, and Z is coming towards us. We have the confirmation corner in the upper right, so this is going to be accept and exit out of the sketch. And then one quick comment on the X and the Y is you won't often hear me refer to X and Y because we want to stay in the terminology of the relations, which is horizontal and vertical. Alright, so dimensions require that we have something to dimension, which is all over here. If I do its pull down, then you have smart, horizontal, vertical ordinates, paths. We'll get to those. Right now we're just going to stay with smart dimensions. And for our first objects, we have line, circle, spline we're not going to worry about initially. The plane inserts a plane into a 3D sketch. Well, we're not in a 3D sketch, so we don't have to worry about that plane right now. Rectangle, center point arc, ellipse, and text, so any of the fonts, the slot, the polygon, and fillets, and then last is the point. So we don't use points very often, but they do come up and they do have are useful. And so let's start with the line. If I do the pull down next to the line, I have line, center line, and midpoint line. Midpoint line is one of those handy, but I haven't really adopted using it, so we'll try to find some places to use it. So initially, since I'm in the line, if I click on the icon, it's going to put me in the line command. And so now my property manager switches over to insert line. It is as sketched, and we're not going to do for construction in length and infinite length or midpoint line initially, but be aware that those exist. It's kind of the same as we want to lock in horizontal, vertical, or apply an angle. Alright, so as we're moving around, you're going to see little flashes and flickers, and those blue lines are inference lines. So that is telling me that it is going to be horizontal to the origin. It's going to be vertical. So notice that next to the little pencil icon, I see the line on the lower left, and on the right there is, well, it's a white background, so we don't really see the white box, but there is a vertical line that is telling me that that is the relation. And even though that relation isn't going to be applied, it is in line and will be in position to have a relation applied to it. So horizontal, vertical, as we just kind of travel around the origin. So the rule is that in some form or fashion, every sketch will be related to the origin. So in that sense, I'm going to drag when it snaps. When the pointer snaps to the origin, it shows me that there is now a yellow box, and as we go further into our relations, you'll see that that is coincident. So when I click and drag, then I'm also seeing a distance and an angle, so 64.45 millimeters. So that gives me a real good indication that my inch drawing is going to have a few problems if I don't convert it over. Also, the yellow box showing the horizontal line, it means that that relation will be inferred, it will be applied. So let's go ahead and just accept that line. I'm going to click, and so that was the click. So if you click once and then drag to the end and click again, that places the line, and then it continues. It's going to be a continuous line, so we can go to the next point and click and then drag out, and I picked up the vertical, and now I have a horizontal, and I have an additional blue vertical inference line that is going to be positioned to the origin. And click one more time, and if I just click back to the origin, then now I can see those relations. All right, so initially, as you're thinking through the process and want to see those relations, coincident, horizontal, vertical, horizontal, vertical, those are going to be handy to have. But eventually they will start to take over and they will get annoying. And at that point, we'll come back up to the view, our hide show, and then we will turn off the view sketch relations. All right, so having done that, if I click on any of those objects, it's going to show me the relations that are applied to it, and if there are multiple objects contained in that relation, it will highlight all of them, and hopefully they're all in the work area of the screen so that we can see them. All right. So since I'm in millimeters, grams, and seconds, we're going to jump into document units, and I'm just going to switch back over to inch, pounds, and seconds, and we'll hit OK. And it used to kick me out of the sketch when I did that. So 2018 apparently does not that does not happen. So if it does kick you out of the sketch, you'll come back over, you'll right click on sketch, and in the upper left you will pick on edit sketch. My warning came up, said I hadn't saved for 20 minutes, so I do need to come up with a save. But now I'm in inch, pounds, and seconds. We can apply a dimension. At this point, the sketch is underdefined. I have 2 lines in black and 2 lines in blue. And so if I grab this upper right and drag, I'm going to be acting like a rubber band. I can stretch it, but because of that relation, in position, coincident position to the origin, that's not going to move. Everything else can move around it. And what I don't want to do is kind of shrink those horizontal lines to 0, because that's going to basically eliminate the object, and the object still wants to be there, so it doesn't want to be eliminated, so it will try to create an error if we try to make that point and that point coincident. Also notice the parameters. We can put in values for those parameters, but this does not get me to a fully defined sketch. So if I were to go 5.5 in X and 3 inches in Y, that makes the rectangle the correct size, but as soon as I click and drag, sorry, it's not going to stay. Alright, so I can Control Z and get that back. And so I just want to pay attention, but most of the time I'm going to say just leave the, whenever you identify the parameters, they are for reference. Only a smart dimension is going to apply the relation, the dimension relation, to fully define the sketch. So even though I put the 550 in, and I apply the dimension, it sees that, and once I accept the modify box, then it's going to be in position. So clicking on the object is my first selection, dragging it to a location for to place the dimension, and clicking places the dimension, and then setting the value in the modify box and hitting the OK. Now we have 3 black lines. My second choice would be to go from object to object. So my first choice would have still been to grab the vertical, but my second choice, if it's not available or something's in the geometry, I'm not capable of grabbing that object, then I would go object to object. So between the 2 lines, 3 inches, we'll go ahead and accept. And then the last would be from point to line or from point to point in my hierarchy. So that gives me a position. And then I'm going to draw the circle, and my fingers were ahead of my mouth again. So we come up to circle and click, and it is showing me the 2 types are the center point and a point on the radius or on the circumference. And then there is a perimeter circle that is 3 points on the perimeter. So I'm going to stay with the click click. My natural tendency is to click drag, so these first couple I'm going to illustrate with click click. So click the first point, drag out some distance, click the second point, we have a circle. Alright, so after years of saying pick the perimeter, I noticed that Solidworks had updated, and we're going to try it out here. So on this first one I'm going to pick the perimeter, and it's going to have a distance of 2.75. Alright, so from the edge, the line, to the circle, 2.75, and then from the top line, and this one I'm going to do this to the center point, and then that one will be 1.5. Alright, so if I pick on the 1.5 and we come over to the leaders, nope, it's not there. Alright, so I'm not sure what I picked last time when I saw that. Alright, so I'm going to still stay with pick the perimeter, because it will give you an arc condition where the center point does not. Alright, so this 1.5 I picked from the center point to the edge, no arc position, or arc condition. So what the arc condition does is say that if I needed a measurement, or it's more convenient to go to a min value or to a max value, I can set those as end conditions for the arc. Alright, so just some habits to get into early and often. The circle then, my number one diagnosis debug tool if I see something in blue is to click on it, hold down the left mouse button and drag. As you drag that item back and forth, it should give you some indication of what's going on. If I were to grab the center point and try and move it, nothing moves because we have the definitions by the stack up of we're connected to the origin, and then we have this distance, and we have this distance, and then this distance coming back to the center that can't move. And so the only thing that moves is the size. So when I go back into its smart dimension, we have a dimension of 1 inch. Then that updates the geometry and drives the whole size to be 1 inch. Alright, we have a thickness of 1 inch, and certainly there is a lot more. This gets us into a sketch and gets us started on the process. I mentioned when I was setting the options that my dimensions will show up in purple because they are not automatically marked to go to the drawing. If yours is showing up in black, that's fine. We'll talk about that logic and that reason later. We're ready to go create the features. So feature, and then we're going to extrude. It should rotate over so we can see. If you want to drag the arrow, and as you're dragging the arrow, I always kind of you can rough position it, and then when you want to get to the fine, hover over the ruler, and it will take you to that location. But a lot of our numbers going to fractionals, going to whatever sizes, it's going to be pretty difficult to get to that number conveniently. So a lot of times we'll come over, as long as that's highlighted in blue, I can type in 1 point, hit enter, has the same effect, and we're not worried about any of these other items just yet. We go ahead and save, or go ahead and accept the feature, and then we're ready to save. So this is showing me where the origin, that is not the same origin as what was created in the model. That doesn't matter. All right, and then my final comment is if you did this another way, if your origin is over here, you saw something different, you selected something different, as long as your dimensions, and I'm just going to expand out so we can see the sketch, and then we can see the extrude. If I double click, as long as your dimensions, my double click is not, there it goes. Wait for the video to catch up. As long as your dimensions, as long as your geometry ends up the same and is valid geometry, I don't care how you got there. As long as you have the end up with the same geometry. So we're going to save, and when you're saving these for our assignments, I'm going to jump up to the 2019. I'm going to create a new folder, and this is going to be for Chapter 1, and well, let's do it as the Chapter 1 for the assignment is 1 through 10, so Chapter 1 Part 1, and so this will be P1-1, and then I'm going to put my initials on it, and that will help me keep track of your files. So we hit save, and when we click out, it goes back, so just clicking anywhere in the work area goes back to the view, and then I can close this part and get ready to go on to the next one.